Good evening. I would like to call the Anacortes City Council meeting of October 17th, 2022 to order. Mr. Franciac, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Carter. Mr. Young.
Here.
Mr. Walters.
Here.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Here.
Ms. Moulton.
Here.
Mr. McDougall.
Here.
Ms. Hubick.
Here.
Thank you.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Young.
If appropriate, I'd like to excuse Mr. Carter. He's working, serving our country in the military.
Second.
Today.
Okay, motion by Mr. Young, a second by Ms. Hubick to excuse Mr. Carter. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? All right, thank you all for coming out, but I'm going to have to move into an executive session. So the City Council is going to move to an executive session to discuss potential litigation as allowed by RCW 42.30110 for approximately 20 minutes, during which no action will be taken. So again, thank you all for your patience. I know a lot of you came to speak to the council, but we're going to adjourn to executive session now. Thanks. Okay, the City Council is adjourned from the executive session. No action was taken, and thank you for your patience. All of you showed up tonight. All right, we are on to item 4 on our agenda, announcements and committee reports. I've got a couple of announcements. First one, I'm sure many of you are aware of last week's threats received at Anacortes High School. The Anacortes Police Department has been working with our federal partners and have determined these threats are affecting multiple communities across the United States. Anacortes does not appear to be a specific target. APD is continuing to work with our partners in law enforcement to identify those responsible. We are grateful for the quick work of our law enforcement professionals in securing the buildings, and we are grateful for our strong relationship with the Anacortes School District. Trestle update. The good news is we've opened up a larger section of the trail now, and we had about 500 people enjoy the increased access. I know it's not open all the way across, but we're in the process of getting the final permit reviews to our state and local agencies, and we're already buying the material so we can avoid any supply chain delays, so we're ready to go. Need a couple more estimates to get the final figure of how much it's going to cost to repair. And then hopefully you can pin us down on a timeline when we get that. Last thing is open house at the fire station on Sunday, so October 23rd from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m., Fire Station 1, so 1016 13th Street. And that is it from me, so I'm on to the Public Works Committee report.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Moulton.
Thank you. The Public Works Committee met just prior to this meeting. It was council members Young, Walters, and myself, and a whole bunch of Public Works staff. We talked about our ongoing sidewalk improvement plan, looking out over the next few years as funding allows us to fill gaps. Some of the areas that have been determined to be priorities are Hillcrest Drive near the cemetery, H Avenue from 41st Street to the First Trail and the ACFL. A 10-foot wide shared use path is proposed to go there, which would be great. And there are some safe routes to school grants that will fill some gaps between Anacortes Middle School and Anacortes High School, increasing safety for everyone. And then also improvements between Commercial and M Avenues between 14th and 20th Street, where we have so many of our services and development happening. We did a brief discussion on capital facilities projects in the Public Works Department, kind of brief, just talking about where the money comes from and where it can go. And that is a continuing conversation. We talked about the 12th and Commercial Roundabout, for which we have $2.25 million in grants from the state. And the consultants are currently doing evaluation and cost-benefit analysis and how much property we need to make that a functional roundabout. So that's in process. And that was it for today. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Next is the Skagit Law and Justice Council, and since Mr. Carter is the representative to that, we will move that to next week. Next up is 4C, Housing Affordability Community Services Committee.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
The Housing Affordability and Community Services Committee met last Thursday, Christine Cleland McGrath and myself, and we interviewed Libby Tarrink and Kat Lohman. Libby is from Away Home, Washington, and Kat is from Skagit YMCA. Their agencies are working together on youth homelessness, youth and young adult, which they include people up to age 24. Their goals are functionally zero homelessness, more people leaving than entering homelessness, people leaving homelessness within 90 days of receiving services from their program. And one of their first action steps is actually to get a by name list of youth homeless, because the state of the world is that we're not even there. We don't even have that level of coordination among various entities and analysis of that data. But this program has had good results in Walla Walla. They are participating here in Anacortes, including with the Family Center. And they're funded by the State Office of Homeless Youth. We also spoke a little bit more with Ms. Lohman about the county's homeless housing plan, which she had a hand in writing. The version of it that was adopted back in 2016, 19, and is due for an update. And we talked with her a little bit about exploring the idea of writing our own, because it does turn on funding opportunities. And although the county has this one for the entire county, you got to look around and look at how that is being used on the ground here in Anacortes. So more to come on that, and that's all we did in that meeting. Thanks.
Okay, any other announcements or committee reports? All right, on to item 5 as public comment. This is your opportunity to address the city council on anything that we use not on the agenda, or you can wait till that time on the agenda where it comes up. But I've got 5 folks signed up, and we use 3 minutes, so we'll start the timer. Just state your name and the city you live in would be helpful, and address the council. So I have Megan Shore. The topic is health and safety first up, and we'll try not to start the timer until you're ready to go. And blue light on, and adjust the microphone so we can hear you. Okay.
My name is Megan Shore, and I am a concerned citizen of Anacortes. Everyone I talk to in town has a story. Unfortunately, all stories these days have the same theme, a theme of concern for public safety and health in our town. I am deeply concerned for my own safety. After listening to Evan Saxton admonishing us to just talk to them a few weeks ago, I recently interacted with a well-known homeless man in town. His name is John Beliveau. He is not like the other homeless people in town in that he keeps the area around his car tidy. He doesn't display the disgusting piles of trash that the others degrade our cities with. His car has been parked on T Avenue for between 2 and 3 years. Last week I walked by him on the street, and when I said hello, his face contorted into hate, and his reply was terrifying. He told me that he hated me and he wanted to throw my body in a dumpster. He repeated, "I hate you," several times, and "Don't look at me, don't talk to me, I don't want your compassion." Now I don't feel safe walking or biking on the streets of my own town. This man may not be a drug addict, but he is for sure mentally unstable. Now, let me talk about compassion. I think compassion is offering help and structure for people on the streets. I think compassion is requiring people to take some responsibility for their lives, for their litter, for their needles, for their feces, and for their addiction to drugs. It is not compassionate to tolerate stealing. It is not compassionate to allow trash, needles, and human excrement to foul our streets. It is not compassionate to avert our eyes while addicts destroy themselves on drugs on T Avenue. It's not compassionate to let dangerous and mentally ill people take up permanent residency on our public streets. There is no freedom in this type of life. These people are slaves to their addiction, and now the citizens of Anacortes are being forced to be slaves to their addictions as well. In the words of Zuby, a young British musician, quote, "Freedom without responsibility is chaos," unquote. We are living in a world of chaos right now, created by our permissive treatment of people who steal, abuse drugs, and threaten other people. We are witnessing a dangerously high degree of civil disorder unfolding around us. Again, I want to ask our City Council to communicate with Washington state lawmakers and demand that they address the chaos. The inaction we are witness to is aiding and abetting the destruction of civil society. We do not want to use Bellingham and Seattle as our models of how to remedy this problem. This problem needs to start with rewriting bad laws and enforcing the good ones. We need more funding for police, jails, rehab centers, and mental institutions. It's time to celebrate civil society instead of contributing to its breakdown. We need order. Thank you.
Thank you. And we try not to applaud in council chambers. And let's see, next up I have Mary Ann Ryan.
To follow. Do I get 257 or 3?
Yeah, all right, well, I'll give you some time. Go ahead.
Okay. My name's Mary Ann Ryan, and I'm a very grateful resident of Anacortes. Thank you, Mayor Miller and members of the council, for allowing me to speak, and for your ongoing work on behalf of the citizens of Anacortes. Appreciate some of the things that have happened with parking over by the marina where I live. This is a humanitarian crisis, and as we all know, Washington's rise in homelessness outpaced the nation. We rank 5th in the nation for homelessness. Seattle's budget for 2022 includes $200 million for affordable housing. So cities like Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Los Angeles have been throwing money at this problem with affordable housing, and it's not helping the homelessness problem. And what I'm here to address, it's a complex problem without easy answers. And in as much as we can't solve all of those problems, we can look at the drug issue. So drug addiction does fuel homelessness. It's documented, and it's a major prediction of homelessness. As the homeless encampments in Seattle and Everett and other cities are being cleared out, we're experiencing people coming here. And these are people that are refusing services. So I have compassion for those people. I feel for people who are addicted. I'm also very cognizant of the fact that addiction feeds addiction. Those people need drugs. They need to find a way to finance their addiction. And quite often, that would be through selling, stealing, whatever, to feed their habit. A natural consequence of that is a need for new customers. And where I'm going to continue to advocate is for our young people. It takes one poor decision from a teenager with a brain that's not fully developed, that doesn't understand the consequences of a decision that they might make when they're at a party or feeling down. My ethos is that I worked in downtown Seattle. In the 80s, I did outreach with homeless kids. I did that in over a 4-year period on the streets of Romania and Bucharest. I worked with at-risk kids in Southern California as a teacher for 20 years in Santa Ana, Anaheim area. And I have a heart for the kids. We need to protect our kids. This drug deals are happening in front of my house. The people that have moved onto 6th from Market, I'm watching it. I can't go anywhere in my house without watching it happen all day long. I would like to turn my eyes away, but I can't. And so I'm asking that we could work with law enforcement to enforce the law and to protect our children, the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next, Kim Hawley. I'll get it right this time. I think. And topic is health and safety.
All right. Good evening, Mayor Miller and the City Council. I am Kim Hawley of Anacortes. As you know, the homelessness, drug crime, and mental health crisis and the resulting public health and safety impacts are the biggest concern of community members. To that end, I was interested in hearing the presentation from our city's Housing Affordability and Community Services Committee tonight. This committee is clearly making some good progress on affordable housing. I also read this committee's presentation to you on January 2022. I read about our various programs for housing under the Anacortes Housing Authority, learned about the listening sessions and the meetings with service providers and city and county leaders, and saw the 3 identified problem buckets identified by this committee. Bucket 1, communication and coordination. Bucket 2, housing. Bucket 3, behavioral health. Well, these are clearly important areas to plan for, and I do understand the housing first philosophy. One program bucket clearly missing is health and safety impacts to the community from the ongoing and increasing crime and open public street camping. I reviewed why this committee was developed in 2016, ways to make housing more affordable, identify gaps in services, and to make recommendations on budget and community development block grants for social services. Where's the recognition of the public health and safety issues and a plan for improvement? What are other cities doing to help address this complex issue? Should we consider adopting some of these actions? Clearly, we have citizen interest for involvement. Auburn has a mayor's task force on homelessness, which provided, with citizen input, a suggested action plan to their city council. They also have a police advisory committee formed by the Auburn Police Department. This advisory committee, which includes citizens, makes recommendations for stronger, effective, and equitable community policing. Tacoma has a Department of Neighborhood and Community Services. They have recognized the emergent public health and safety impacts and unmanageable environmental impacts of encampments and open drug use. They seek community problem solving and partnering. Edmonds has a homelessness task force, which provides recommendations on various topics, including unlawful use of public spaces. Their January 2022 address to the City Council recognized that parks and other public spaces should be accessible and safe for all users. There's no criminalizing of homelessness, but areas are clearly defined where homelessness is not allowed. Everett states their commitment to creating and preserving safe public spaces for the whole community. The city responds with a team that connects to encampment inhabitants with services, but also has a plan for cleanup and enforcement. While this is only a short list, each of these cities recognizes that there are public health and safety as well as environmental impacts. Each recognizes that public health should be accessible and safe for all. Each has a place for interested citizens to participate. It seems there are 4 buckets to the issue. The bucket that's missing for us, health and safety, #1 citizen priority. In summary, we want to be part of the solution. We look forward to the invitation, which welcomes us to the table. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, Ann Kisner. Okay, thank you. So we can get that for the record. Next, Diana Bartlett. Oh, maybe, am I not reading it correctly? It's Diana. Maybe she left at the executive session. Okay, anybody else? Yep, come on up.
Hello, council members and Mayor Miller. I'm here to say thank you as a taxpayer for buying the building on Molly Lane. I trust that deal's going through.
Can you state your name?
Oh, Bruce Bagleen, Anacortes, Old Town. Sorry. So anyways, is the deal going through with the fire station? Is this top secret?
No, the offer has been made. So
okay.
That's it. The offer
with no contingencies, and you're going to really do it?
We have made the city of Anacortes has made an offer to purchase the property at Molly Lane.
Okay, so I went by there today, and the sign's up. It doesn't say sold or anything like that. And I think if you take some of the contingencies off, you might have a better shot at it.
Yeah.
And as a taxpayer, and looking at the way the city spends money, I would say $2.5 million is a bargain.
Gotcha.
I'd even go 2.6. With no conditions.
Okay.
Okay, so that's neither here nor there, but thank you very much for getting into that. It's a really a big win. So the big loss is I saw my very first RV drug deal yesterday. I really saw it with my own eyes, and it was very frightening. I've been a merchant mariner for 40 years. I've been to every horrible port in the world, and I never felt so frightened as I did walking to the N Avenue Beach with these rough-looking characters going into a trailer. Nothing rigged up to it. It's not a camping trailer. It doesn't go to the campgrounds. It's parked on the street. Okay, it's been there for who knows how long, years, selling drugs. So I didn't want them to see me. So I witnessed this whole thing, and I did witness the whole thing. I'm not sure why it's such a problem with our police department that they can't just park their car there or go there and say, we have a place for you. You can park in our parking lot. You can use our restroom. Maybe go to the police department parking lot. Right? They've got cameras all over the building. It's off the street. Citizens are protected. They don't have to be worried. Right? Okay, well, that's my feeling, and that's what these people are here for, and it's the #1 problem in this city. You can forget the affordable housing thing. We've already got that solved. We have an Anacortes Housing Authority. If you can't afford to live here, you can get on the waiting list and you can get into the Anacortes Housing Authority. In spite of the city, there's efforts being made by private landowners, including San Juan Motel, sold condominiums for $70,000. A checker at Safeway could afford to live there, okay? Another idea is, have you ever thought about raising the minimum wage in this town to something like 25 bucks an hour? Seattle did that. Obviously, there's two ends of this affordable housing thing, right? The affordable has sailed. That ship is gone, and it's not coming back. I mean, hopefully we'll have a big recession and these real estate prices will reset, but who knows?
Okay, thank you very much.
That's my point.
Thank you very much. Okay, anybody else? All right, I'm going to move off of public comment and on to our consent agenda. Consent agenda items A and B, Council.
Mayor Miller,
Mr. McDougall.
I move approval of consent agenda items A and B.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. McDougall, a second by Ms. Hubick to approve consent agenda items A and B. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. We are moving on to public hearing. I guess before we move on to public hearing, since so many of you are here tonight, I will remind folks, if you see something that makes you feel unsafe, call 911. If you don't feel comfortable calling 911, call the non-emergency number, and folks will respond as quickly as possible. Last week, I was out with our outreach team on T Avenue and visiting with some folks who were living on the streets as well. Council has provided some code updates as well that could potentially add some tools to the toolbox. And I know Mr. Carter would have reported on it from the Law and Justice Council meeting that the subject was a letter signed by myself and the 3 other city mayors in Skagit County asking for some relief when it comes to some law enforcement reforms that have made it very difficult to enforce some of the actions there. So anyway, I figure I'd owe you all a little bit of update of what we're doing there.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters.
If I could just tag on to that a little bit. Also in the past year, we have adopted ordinances that close our parks, close them at night, closes our forest lands, makes it clear that people are not welcome to camp in parks in the forest lands. A couple of years ago, we adopted ordinance prohibiting fires and camping and alcohol and all of those types of things in our parks and forest lands. Provides enforceability of those provisions. As a HACS committee, the Housing Affordability and Community Services Committee, with the unfortunate acronym, we're not actually tasked with public safety. We do have a public safety committee for those types of issues. But when we come across things that are within our wheelhouse, we have done some work on those things. So for instance, as Mr. Miller suggested, we have drafted ordinance that would provide a process for trespassing people from the parks, the library, the museum, other Anacortes public facilities when they don't follow a uniform code of conduct, which we didn't previously have adopted. Would provide parking of RVs in residential areas prohibited for more than 4 hours, not 72, not you can move it a couple inches and comply with the 72, but full stop anywhere in a residential area, you can't have it for more than 4 hours. So within a single police officer's shift, they could see that vehicle twice within the 4-hour window and take action to exclude it, and would prohibit sleeping on the sidewalk in our commercial zones during the day. It would try to address some of these issues within the bounds of where we are constrained, which is Ninth Circuit court decisions, constitutional rights of the homeless, which we can debate, but we do need to tread carefully because it's the reputations, liability of our police officers and others who are enforcing these laws to ensure that they do not violate the constitutional rights of anyone as the courts have construed them. When we get these ordinances added to the agenda, we'll have more of an opportunity to look at those in detail and have a discussion about it and a public comment opportunity about it so that we can talk more about where the gaps are even after adoption of those ordinances. We know that they're not going to fix everything, but we expect that they will make some improvement, and there will be much more to do.
And I will say that the message that I relayed to some of those folks that have refused services, that I will enforce every code and ordinance on the books. The challenge is typically our ordinances are a $1,000 fine, 90 days in jail. I'm not interested in fining anybody. I'm interested in changing trajectory of some folks that have chosen to not accept services, but I haven't yet found one of our municipal judges that are willing to put somebody in jail for even 5 days for littering. So you can imagine the challenge there of trying to change the trajectory. So, but again, like Mr. Walters said, we'll have these ordinances come before council, and that'll be an opportunity again for you all to engage with the council and help us all work together to find solutions. Okay, moving on to public hearing, and we're going to talk about Ordinance 4025, Critical Area Regulations Amendments to address riparian management zones, AMC 1970-330. And that gave Mr. Nathan some time to come on up, and if you're ready to go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is good. And thank you, council members. I'd also like to thank the planning staff, and in particular Mr. Meismer, who worked with regulatory agencies, consulting biologists, the Planning Commission, and members of the public to draft this current iteration of our Critical Areas Ordinance. The goal of these changes that I'm going to be discussing today is for our Critical Areas Ordinance to be in compliance with the Growth Management Act's requirement that critical areas be protected according to the best available science. Most of what I'll be speaking about today is regarding riparian management zones and riparian watercourses, but there is one item within our Critical Areas Ordinance that the planning staff recommends we address and amend. And that's this first slide here. The planning staff recommends that we alter section 19.70.235 of our critical area ordinance, which relates to wetland buffer averaging. We'd like to change category 3 and 4 wetlands to not be able to be reduced through the buffer averaging process to anything less than 75% of their standard buffer width. It had previously been 50%, but in order to be in compliance with the Growth Management Hearings Board's request, we've requested to change it so that all wetland buffers category 1 through 4 cannot be reduced to less than 75%. So moving on to riparian management zones. Riparian management zones consist of the watercourse and the area adjacent to this watercourse, previously noted as the stream and buffer. So it's a little bit of change of terms. Previously it was the watercourse will be changed, or the stream will be changed to be considered a watercourse, and the buffer will be changed to be considered a riparian management zone. The riparian management zone is a critical area. Specifically, it's a type of fish and wildlife habitat conservation area. A project site's RMZ is determined by the site potential tree height, which is the height of the tallest 200-year-old site potential tree height, or 100 feet, whichever is greater, measured horizontally from this watercourse, meaning so there's a minimum RMZ width of 100 feet because that's what the Department of Fish and Wildlife has determined is the minimum width for an RMZ to provide the water quality functions that are necessary for a highly functioning watercourse. Activities that may impact an RMZ must provide a critical area report prepared by a qualified professional describing the functions and values of the RMZ. The report must include the 200-year site potential tree height as determined by the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and this URL below is a mapping tool that the Department of Fish and Wildlife has created so that property owners and regulatory agencies can determine what the site potential tree height is for given stream location. This graph at the top typifies what a riparian management zone looks like, and since we are west of the Cascades, this forested ecoregion is similar to what we would see in the city of Anacortes. In the middle, you have the active channel, which is the section of the riparian management zone that conveys hydrology. Adjacent to that, you have the riparian zone, which is typically hydric soils or wet soils and water-associated plants and animals. And then further upland from that active channel, you have the zone of influence, which is coniferous trees typically in this area that provide shade for the active channel, keeping the water cool and allowing it to be oxygenated. They provide filtration of pollutants before it reaches the active channel, and they provide organic content to the active channel for insects and larger riparian animals. And you can see below kind of what these riparian ecosystems look like, and on the right, that would be what you would see east of the Cascades. Activities that may impact an RMZ must provide a critical areas report prepared by a qualified biologist describing the functions and values of the RMZ. The report must include the 200-year site potential tree height as determined by the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And again, there's that link that helps people understand how big that width would be. The most common site potential tree height in Anacortes ranges from 91 to 193 feet. But like I said before, the minimum width would be 100 feet because that's the minimum determined by Department of Fish and Wildlife to provide that water quality functioning. So for parcels that are located within an RMZ, within that 100 to 193 foot buffer, it's a long-term goal of the city to restore the city's RMZs and to protect fish passage where scientifically justified. Development is prohibited within or over the riparian watercourse, except as provided in the subsections below. Provided that no other access is available, the access is provided by a freestanding structure that maintains the natural channel and floodway of the watercourse. The coverage of the watercourse and disturbance of the RMZ and other adjacent environmentally critical areas or buffers are minimized, and that the material used to construct these access are in compliance with NOAA's guidelines for materials that you should use in and adjacent to aquatic lands. In the watercourse, any action detrimental to habitat or actions affecting vegetation is prohibited, except as provided in the subsections above. Furthermore, for parcels that are located within an RMZ, development is prohibited except under the following conditions. Like I mentioned before, to provide the minimum necessary access if no other access is available. On existing developed lots and platted lots existing prior to the adoption of this ordinance that satisfy one or more of the provisions within AMC Table 19.70.040A, which are our critical areas exemptions, which is typical of the rest of our critical areas ordinance, and Table 19.70.045, which are our permitted alterations. Given that the applicant demonstrates that the development complies with flow control and water quality requirements, regardless of the area of land disturbing activity, any development, including but not limited to coverage by impervious surface, does not exceed 35% of the total lot area. When compliance with stormwater flow control and water quality requirements is required based solely on those subsections under 2A and B, the director may approve a restoration plan in lieu of compliance with those subsections, provided that the applicant demonstrates that the watercourse and/or RMZ ecological function will be restored so that it prevents harmful erosion, protects water quality, and provides diverse habitat, and that the restoration results in greater protection of the watercourse and RMZ than compliance with those stormwater regulations. So basically, if you are intending to develop within the RMZ, but your development isn't triggered under the stormwater chapter, you're still required to provide flow control and water quality requirements as part of your development, even if you're below what it says for stormwater. If you can meet those requirements that it's not providing harmful erosion, protects water quality, and provides diverse habitat, and that the result is of restoration provides greater protection for the RMC than those sections, than those stormwater sections. In the RMZ, any action detrimental to habitat and any action affecting vegetation is prohibited, except as provided in those subsections above. If the RMZ is degraded due to the lack of trees and vegetation or other habitat issues, The applicant should prepare and carry out a restoration plan that restores the ecological function of the RMZ to the extent commensurate with the impact of the development of the RMZ. So basically, whatever you are affecting within the RMZ, you need to replace the functions and values that are lost. If the development is authorized pursuant to legal non-conforming situations, critical areas exemptions, or permitted alterations, the director must require that the degraded portion of the RMZ that occurs as a result of development be restored by removing existing non-native invasive plant species and replanting with native vegetation and following our mitigation requirements as described in 19.70.130. So that was a lot of code, but to make it more into a relatable situation, I think that it's important for property owners to understand what it would mean if they're located adjacent to a water course. So if you have an undeveloped parcel that's adjacent to a water course and your property is entirely located within an RMZ, there's a section in our code that already allows for permitted alterations to critical areas. And one of those permitted alterations to critical areas is the single-family residences and normal appurtenances, which furthermore, new single-family dwellings on existing legal lots may intrude into critical areas or their buffers when all the following conditions are met. It's demonstrated that it's not feasible to avoid the critical area or buffer. Alteration of critical areas and their buffers, including all clearing, grading structures and appurtenances, has not and will not exceed cumulatively 2,800 square feet of disturbance. So there are two provisions that I've mentioned so far that would impact a developer, how much space they could develop on an undeveloped platted lot. One of which is that they can't exceed 2,800 square feet of disturbance. The other one was mentioned earlier where they can't develop more than 35% of their lot. So as it is with other critical area provisions within our code, the most restrictive would apply. So either 35% or a maximum of 2,800 square feet of disturbance is the permitted amount within an RMZ. Also, this action does not allow critical areas or their buffers to be converted to lawn or residential landscaping beyond the minimum necessary to maintain an approved structure. Mitigation sequencing provided in this chapter is applied, and the proposal includes on-site mitigation to the extent feasible. Normal appurtenances included in this provision include garages, decks, and walkways incidental to residential living and that do not constitute a special privilege. So you have your single-family residence, which would be the home, and the normal appurtenances, which are those that I just mentioned. Those would all have to, if they're a part of your development proposal, they would need to be under 2,800 square feet or 35% of your lot. There are also small project waivers for things that have negligible impacts within the RMZ. Some of our terms that I've talked about today, riparian management zone means that area that has the potential to provide full riparian functions. That's determined by the site potential tree height, which means the average maximum height of the tallest dominant trees at age 200 for a given place's soils site class. Here's a graphic that the GIS department developed to highlight what parcels look like adjacent to those streams. The green polygons are those that are undeveloped, and the yellow polygons are those that are partially developed. So you can see there aren't that many. There are 10 partial for Beaver Brook and 7 undeveloped for Beaver Brook, and the numbers pretty much hover around under 20 for all of these stream reaches. So the guiding document that has informed the science that has gone into these changes is the Riparian Ecosystems Volume 2 Management Recommendations, which was created by the Department of Fish and Wildlife and distributed to jurisdictions who are working on rewriting their stream and stream buffer protections. We use this document to develop this current iteration of code and have been in conversation with the Department of Fish and Wildlife throughout the entire process. And in conclusion, the Department of Fish and Wildlife and Department of Commerce fully supports the recommended riparian management zone regulations as proposed and confirms that the regulations meet the required best available science. And With that, I'd take any questions that you guys have or members of the public.
All right, thank you, Mr. Goldschmidt. Any questions? And this is a public hearing, so I guess I'll start. Any members of the public want to comment? Okay, yeah, come on up. And
thank you, Mayor Miller and City Council members. My name is Marlene Finley. I'm the president of Evergreen Islands, and I'd like to urge you to adopt staff's recommendations presented this evening. I particularly want to highlight the limits on buffer reductions, as well as the use of best available science as a basis for delineating and protecting riparian management zones based on site potential tree height. I applaud the city for using WDFW's riparian management recommendations, and thank you for having this public process where we've been able to engage and share our thoughts. Thank you.
thank you. Anybody else from the public? Okay, Mr. Welcher, come on up.
Brian Wetcher, Anacortes. I'd like to commend both staff and council members as well as the Planning Commission for their efforts on this. It's been a long haul to get here, so I really like to commend everyone on the work that they've done and the collaboration that they've put together to put this language together now. I think we have a really good basis going forward for a critical areas ordinance that will be effective into the future as long as we adhere to it. And just one question that I have. Do we feel that there are reasonable parameters on the term of reasonable use within the document? That's my only question, because that's the variable that is left up to staff to determine. And although I did notice there's some guardrails around it within those parameters in the document, I was wondering if we could perhaps look at reasonable use and have it as a slightly more definitive term within the document at some point in time. But I'd urge you to adopt it as is, and I believe that reasonable use may be the term in which we have to do enforcement in the future. So please keep that in mind, but thank you for the process and the document that's coming forward. It's a real improvement on what we've had.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right. Anybody else before I close the public hearing and turn it to council? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing and turn it over to council for any questions or comments.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
Maybe just to respond to the question about reasonable use, there is a provision for reasonable use in the document. It's already in there. It's already adopted. We must have a provision for reasonable use in the document to protect the constitutional property rights of people who wouldn't be able to do any other development. It requires a variance permit, requires a type 3 hearing examiner review. And Mr. Goldsmith, I don't think you've been here particularly very long, but do you happen to know how many variance permits we've issued in the last 6 years? Zero. Yeah. Yes, thank you. So I hope that provides some assurance to how this works. And there is quite a bit of criteria associated with that provision as well. But it's also really not being changed in maybe any way at all. There appears to be maybe a couple of words in this update.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Young.
No, I just really wanted to commend the staff, the team of people that came together to work through these things, to move us forward. Without everybody coming together to find a workable solution, I still believe that our island is truly something special, but I think this helps us be able to carry it forward. So, just kudos to the team, staff, language, the hard work that went in it, and I'm very much in support of it. If there's nobody else, unless somebody wanted to say something else, I move we approve Ordinance 4025 as presented.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Mr. Young, a second by Ms. Moulton to approve ordinance 4025 critical areas regulation amendments to address riparian management zones. Mr. Franciac, would you take the vote, please?
Mr. Young.
Yes.
Mr. Walters.
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
Yes.
Ms. Moulton.
Yes.
Mr. McDougall.
Yes.
Ms. Hubick.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Mayor Miller?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Walters.
So I guess I hesitated there because I do have a question. You had articulated a request for one particular change.
Yeah, correct. There.
Do we have that in the document already, or did we breeze right by that?
We don't currently have it within the proposed ordinance. Libby, do you want to?
Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Ms. Grange,
Thank
please.
you. As staff was reviewing the draft code, we noticed a few grammatical issues and also some cross references that could be fixed. But no, they are not in the draft that you have before you.
But what about the first slide that you had that requested a change from the 50 to 75%? Is that change accommodated in the
Yes,
text already?
that's in there.
Okay,
Yep.
yeah. The grammatical errors, I imagine the code reviser will highlight, and we'll figure those out. If there's anything substantial, though, I hope that staff's general practice would be to bring that back rather than just make the changes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, we are moving on to other business. Item 6A is Resolution 3100, establishing real property purchase checklist. And before we go into that, just a quick update for council. The city did submit a purchase and sale, a purchase offer on the Molly Lane property that houses the city's station number 3 fire station that we currently rent. As you all probably were aware, there was another buyer out there, so we are currently in the backup offer position. But with that, we thought it would be a good idea, staff thought it would be a good idea to codify a process for real estate purchases for the city. So with that, Ms. Swetnam.
Thank you, Mayor Miller, members of council, members of the audience. I am happy tonight to introduce Resolution 3100, which establishes a checklist for guidelines for working through the due diligence process for future real estate acquisitions. This came about through the discussion about the purchase of the Molly Lane property, and there were some questions about standard practices that the city should engage in when acquiring real property interests in the future. And so in the true public fashion, we've borrowed this from another agency that's been using a similar checklist. So I do want to say before I go into the specifics that the city does have a purchasing policy that goes through all of our procurement and purchasing procedures that is adopted by resolution, and this checklist would supplement, not replace, any of the work that's in that purchasing policy. So the purpose of this is to have council adopt a policy checklist to be used with every real estate purchase to ensure that the city completes all necessary due diligence prior to any transactions. And from my personal experience in this role, checklists are a good thing because we deal with a lot of different types of issues. So what's in your packet goes through a series of steps, and I'll just walk through them quickly. So first of all, identifying the land or interest to be acquired and gather information about it. Next, to double check zoning for the area that the property is located in to make sure that it's appropriately zoned for the intended use. Third, to identify the funding source. Finance Director Hoagland will be happy to see that one in there. 4, to discuss general information in executive session if a discussion in open session would impact price and adversely affect the city's position moving forward. The next step is to seek council authorization to execute a purchase and sale agreement in open session. Next, to obtain and review a title report for the property. Step 7 is to obtain a waiver of retroactivity. I've not done this before, but essentially this is a situation where if the purchase is funded by a grant, you can get a waiver of retroactivity from the funding agency if they haven't distributed funds yet to go ahead and move forward with the purchase. I've not seen that come up in the time that I've been here, but certainly the city could be in a situation where it wants to purchase a piece of property using grant funds. Next, a record of survey, if that's necessary. Step 9 is to complete a phase 1 environmental assessment. 10 is to obtain an appraisal and/or a CMA. 11, staff inspection. Probably that would happen sooner, but still a good idea. Additional required due diligence based on the circumstances of the property. For example, if an arborist needs to go in and look at trees, if there are leases that need to be reviewed, if there are geotech reports that are appropriate. The seller, step 13, would be to get a draft of the proposed instrument to transfer the interest and have that be available for council's review. 14 is obtain any necessary documents to get clear title. Occasionally there are issues that have to be resolved before title can be clearly transferred. 15, discuss any potential litigation in executive session and address any necessary extension of due diligence. 16, seek council authorization for the mayor to execute closing documents. Obtain the settlement statement for finance review. And step 18, get the finance director to confirm payment or transfer of funds. And finally, the purchase documents would then be recorded. So obviously there are some of these items that might not come up in every transaction, but this certainly, based on my experience, seems to hit the high points that we would want to look at anytime there was a purchase of property. So staff is recommending approval of this, although I'm happy to answer any questions. And if there are any adjustments or steps that you all feel need to be added or taken out, this is a good opportunity to discuss that.
Thanks. And for members of the public, I mean, we don't see a lot of opportunities to buy property in the city limits because, as we all know, there's not much there. But again, we're using this process anyway because MRSC and the city that we borrowed this from seemed to think it was a good idea to use this process. But certainly open to any inputs that you all have or questions from Ms. Swetnam.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
I think it's certainly worthwhile talking about these steps because contrary to one of the comments we got earlier, we really do have to have a contingency period and we do have to do due diligence when the city acquires property because we're spending public money. And we need to be able to make sure that we're able to use the property that we purchase for the purposes that we intend. We're not doing a lot of this, so this hasn't really come up before. I guess I have a couple of, I don't know if I'd call them concerns, but thoughts on this. One is that I'm generally not in favor of adopting resolutions, one-off resolutions that have a permanent effect that just disappear into the ether and they're never revisited. Like typically we adopt into code provisions like this, although it might not be appropriate because it's very fluid. I mean, some of these things might not be required for every piece of property that we purchase. Some maybe don't make sense or don't apply. Another thought, though, about this is that if we are considering the purchase of a piece of property where we're not 100% sure that it'll work for the purposes for which we want to use it, probably what makes sense is to revisit the property with council before we exit the feasibility period, the contingency period in the purchase and sale agreement, so that council can get a piece of property under contract, and then we can evaluate it, and then we can make a deliberate decision before finalizing the purchase with all the information that would be gathered during a feasibility period. I've been involved in quite a number of these commercial real estate deals now, and sometimes that feasibility analysis is fairly involved. So I tend to think that maybe this checklist in its current form is not ready for adoption by council, but the point of the checklist, the steps in the checklist, the fact that there is a checklist to make sure that you check with all of these steps before proceeding, I think is useful. But if we want to adopt it, I think I would tend to rewrite it into sentences and paragraphs to make it clear exactly who the actor is and who's doing what and what the steps are, and that check-in step prior to the end of the contingency period that I mentioned.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Swetnam. Oh, yeah, that was you. Wait, no, who was that? Sorry.
No, so I just wanted to say that really great points, Mr. Walters, and based on that feedback, one recommendation maybe for the resolution itself would be to amend it to make it clear that this resolution actually gets attached to the purchasing policy as an exhibit, which is available on the website. So maybe that deals with the disappearing into the ether issue. And I'm happy to kind of rewrite this as more of a more of a narrative and circulate it to all of you to provide any additional edits that you have. I don't think there's any particular sense of urgency about this, and we can certainly include a step for bringing the transaction back to council before the end of the contingency period to make sure that all of the due diligence satisfies council's direction.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Young.
Just, a question. I think, the point that you made about getting it attached to the purchasing policy allows for sort of a fluid connection to the existing policy as it is. Is there any urgency of having this in place as, with any of the deals or any of the things that we may be considering in the short term?
I don't believe so. I think
Okay.
we don't have to have this adopted to do this level of due diligence.
Okay.
So
Thank you. That answers my question. All right.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. McDougall.
I liked Ms. Swetnam's suggestion about basically circulating it this week, and each of us can submit edits. Maybe, essentially just bring it back to consent agenda next week after that.
I see some head nods, and that should work. Okay, thank you very much, unless you added some questions.
well, I just maybe not. Next week is pretty tight turnaround just for packet time. So if you all want to take a few days to look at it, we could get it in for the November 7th agenda.
Mr. Walters.
And depending on the level of effort required, it might not be suitable for consent either. It might need it on a regular agenda to talk more about it.
All right. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 8B, 2023 operating budget, Public Works. This is a discussion item that will be led by Mr. Hoagland. Mr. Hoagland.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and members of the audience. I've put together a couple slides I wanted to go through quickly before we jump into the budget in OpenGov. So I did want to point out there were several significant issues that had range across many of the departments. In the 2023 budget, Mayor Miller addressed a number of those in his mayor's message, but I wanted to point out some of those salient items that you'll be seeing, across the presentation. And I wanted to make an update on OpenGov. So both the CFP and operating budget are available for public viewing on the city finance webpage. And OpenGov has still not linked to the city's accounting system. So we actually were expecting that to have happened by now, so it should be coming shortly. I do apologize for the age data that's starting to it's from the initial June update, that data. So the actuals, when you're looking at budget to actual in OpenGov, it's only through June. It is a little bit aged at this point. We also got a question from a constituent last week, or I guess the week before, and he asked about comparative tax rates. So I talked with the mayor about this. He thought it seemed a reasonable idea to show what Anacortes residents were paying in taxes compared to our counterparts throughout the county. So the first one is property tax millage. You can see the millage rate for Anacortes is much lower than anybody else in the county at $1.16 per thousand, all the way up to $2.09 per thousand in Cedar Woolley. The next one is sales tax, and I broke out all three portions of the sales tax that gets charged when you make a purchase. So the three portions are the state portion at 6.5%, the county portion at 0.85%, and then the city portion, which for the city of Anacortes is at 1.45%. So for Anacortes, and I made a note down here, that includes both of the voted initiatives that impacted sales tax, the affordable housing 1/10 and the 2/10 transportation benefit district. Another thing that is included in all of the city portions is the 3/10 public safety sales tax that all the cities remit to the county for the county jail. So we're at 8.8% total, Burlington at 8.5, LaConner 8.5, Cedro at 8.5, and Mount Vernon at 8.7. So Mount Vernon is the only other one who has enacted the TBD sales tax. We are the only city in the county to have the voted affordable housing sales tax. The utility.
Mr. Walters.
I think this is a useful chart. It might be worthwhile amending it a little bit to insert those footnotes into the yellow shaded portion of the chart, just to have a section that says the 1/10 affordable housing, Anacortes, and the 2/10 TBD, Anacortes and Mount Vernon. Now, didn't the other cities also adopt an affordable housing sales tax, Councilman Manically?
I thought Mount Vernon was the only one that I knew of, unless it was part of the overall county initiative.
I don't recall exactly how that went, but
I don't know the answer to that question. If it happened very recently.
Anyway, I think that would help flesh it out a little bit so you could see it at a glance.
Yeah, absolutely. The utility tax. So City of Anacortes, we have all four of the primary utilities: water, sewer, storm sewer, and solid waste. So we're at 7% for everything except solid waste is 12%. Council may remember the additional 5% that was passed a number of years ago that goes to support road maintenance fund now. So that 5% is carved out directly through the receipting process. City of Burlington doesn't charge utility tax on any of the four utilities. Likewise, LaConner, 0% across the board. Mount Vernon charges 7% water, 8.5% sewer, 0 on their storm sewer, and 7% on solid waste. Cedar Woolley is at 6% on water, and then 10.5% for the other three utilities. And I made a note down here regarding the water utility tax. Mount Vernon and Cedar Woolley don't have their own water utility. The PUD collects that and remits that back to them. And one thing else I wanted to point out that the city is required to pay public utility tax to the state. The state levies a 5.029% public utility tax. So the majority of that 7% that we're collecting gets remitted back to the state. So the cities that aren't, I guess, overtly charging that utility tax is built into their rates because they still need to pay the state for those revenues. And the other thing I forgot to include on here, the 6% that's charged on private utilities, that's electricity, natural gas, cable TV, and phone. All of the cities in Skagit County charge that. Okay, so jumping to the budget now. So this is the overall city budget. It's a comparative chart looking at 2020 actuals, 21 actuals. The 22 budget year-to-date through June 22 actuals and then the 23 budget. I put in the far column out here the change by category. And then again, this is the total city budget, the $129.4 million that the mayor created his mayor's message around. We're going to be looking at the operating budget for Public Works tonight. We've looked at capital through the CFP review. So this is the operating budget with capital removed. And you can see just at this high level, number of things jump out. The debt service, I wanted to point out, this would be the interest portion of the debt service. When we make a debt service payment, it consists of principal and interest, so the principal has been removed as part of capital. So this is in the 23 budget, we have a $1.2 million debt service expense requirement, which is $481,000 less than we had last year in 2022. And that was due from the refunding bond that we issued earlier this year that refunded a 2012 water revenue bond. We defeased a portion of that bond at the same time, so it dramatically reduced the debt service requirement. Just a little more detailed look at those same categories. We just talked about the water bond being refunded in 2022. So another big item that affects all departments in the city is the salaries and benefits increase. So for Public Works, that's a little over 1.1 million. And all of that, or the majority of that, is driven by the collective bargaining agreements. And that's a total of 17.6% citywide. Services, when you look at 2022 against 2023, service category for Public Works, it's $856,000 increase. The majority of that is $600,000 that we are adding onto the road overlay budget. Public Works is anticipating having some of that budget left over. They want to proactively carry that over into the 2023 budget. Our liability insurance went up about, well, it went up more than $240,000, but $240,000 of the increase is Public Works responsibility, and then we also budgeted $360,000 in utility increases across Public Works. In supplies, an increase of $417,000. $110,000 of that is for fuel for the city vehicle fleet. $210,000 in operating supplies. I forgot to leave out of my sentence here. It's $210,000 in operating supplies for the sanitary sewer utility. I spoke with Becky Fox earlier today. She rattled off a number of projects they have in mind that they're going to work in-house this coming year that affected that supply line. And then in the road department, an additional $65,000 in material that they'll use for road work. They're going to try and do a little more small paving projects in the coming year than what we did in the past year.
Okay, Miller.
So,
Mr. McDougall, I think.
Just a very quick question, clarification on the salaries and benefits. So, a large portion of the Public Works Department works in, like in the water treatment, and basically their salaries, because Anacortes is not the only customer of that product, essentially of the water product, so their salaries are like funded via all of the major customers of the water treatment plant, correct? Like the refineries, McConnell, Carver, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly, quite true. The water department, in fact, any of the actual plant operators, the city's portion of that consumption is about 12% overall. And then that it varies as you get through the system, the distribution lines, and then into the city and the transmission lines. But yeah, that's a very good point. All those water department employees, or almost all of them, are split among the other regional customers at some level.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so as I said, all of this material, sorry, not all of this material. The CFP budget and the operating budget are both available for review on the city website. Just navigate to the finance page, and along the left column, there's a link for operating budget and a link for CFP. You'll see these, the report options that come up. One of the reports you can click on is for the 2023 annual budget, and then in parentheses, cap and op, that's for capital and operating. So if you click into that, on the left side here, there's this, you can click on this to identify the number of views. So that report has been set up with a number of specific views to drill down into the different areas of the budget. So this collapsed public work operating category, this is similar to what we were just looking at in those slides. So I wanted to start here. And again, this is all of Public Works. It says debt service principal. That's just the name that category was given. In this case, since we're looking at just operating, it is just expense. And you can click into that and see that it drops down interest and related costs. Salaries and benefits, 9.4 million in 2022 versus 10.6. And then the services, we talked about a little bit, 15.7 million 2022, 16.5 million 2023. And then supplies at nearly 2.7 million in 22, 3.1 million in 23. So I was going to just, if there's no objections, I was just going to drop down to services, and we can go through the different service lines and take a look at those categories. If you'd like to drill down into salaries and benefits, just that's fine. Let me know if you'd like more detail in that area. So communication is, that captures a lot of kind of what you think of as typical communication, phone bills, postage, things of that nature. Insurance, this is where we catch the liability insurance and property insurance. I mentioned that earlier. We had a significant increase in our insurance premium from 2022 to 2023. Interfund is pretty consistent with the prior year. Interfund services consist both of vehicle costs and computer costs. We have them both set up the same way to pay for the departments that run those, and also to capture replacement charges for future replacement costs of those items. Miscellaneous is an unused category for the most part in Public Works. The only place we really use miscellaneous is in the ambulance service fund. You'll see that next week. Leases likewise, for the most part, unused. Professional services, stop 41. This is where the majority of this is made up of the road overlay program. So we have 2.4 million budgeted for overlays next year. And this look here is as far as I can drill down. If you'd like any additional information on that, please let me know. I tried to balance giving information on what made the significant changes from year to year without getting too much in the weeds and hard to follow.
OpenGov is easy to bounce around all over the place and look at different things. Mr. Walters?
I'm not necessarily requesting you do it now, but how do you drill down into that? Because clicking it doesn't seem to have any effect.
Yeah, so at this point, I opened up a tab that has the budget, so that's not available for everybody at this level of detail. This will be coming, but it's not available.
Yeah, you were on the public portal, correct, before, or the?
This is the same report that's available on the public portal.
Okay.
But to drill down further, we would need to go into the actual budget database where we do our editing. Taxes and assessments, travel and training, you'll see coming back up. It's not a huge amount, but back higher than what we've had in the past. A lot of catch-up to do post-COVID. And utilities, I mentioned earlier, we spend a lot of money on utilities, and you can see that in your home bills, what natural gas and electricity are doing. So we're experiencing the same thing. These views over here, I wanted to point out, I think it was Mr. Walters asked about REIT use in the when we were talking about the budget last week. So there's a number of views here that you can click into to see additional information. So the REIT revenue shows what we've collected in REIT the last couple of years. The REIT 1 transfers, so this is what we're using in our 2023 budget. We aren't using any REIT 2 in 2023, or at least we haven't budgeted any REIT 2 yet. We're planning on using all REIT 1, totaling $1.7 million. You can see the funds that those are being budgeted for. The general fund, $300,000, that's the facilities work. Street maintenance, we have budgeted $800,000. Arterial street construction, $315,000, and parks capital, $315,000.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton?
Thanks. Mr. Hoagland, would the $600,000 that is presumably will be left over from this year, will that be added to the 2023 budget?
Yes, so that $600,000 is included in this $800,000 that we have budgeted for the road maintenance fund. So we're kind of proactively, concluding that we're going to have leftover budget, and we just roll that into the 2023 road maintenance fund budget. So yeah, that additional 600 is part of this 800,000.
So don't we have usually more than that per year, or no?
Yeah, definitely. So the last couple of years, in fact, we've been funding the road maintenance fund using. We've made up a lot of our property tax use in the past years with REIT, real estate excise tax. We've had other programs and commitments that have come up that we have transferred property tax into to support those programs. So this year, in fact, I think we have a view. So you can take a look at this online, this property tax revenue view. So you get a look here at what we've done the last few years with with property tax. So the general fund, we're at 375. Prior years, it's been significantly more. But you can see in the road maintenance fund, the last couple of years, we haven't put any property tax into it. We've been funding that with a REIT. So we're working now to get those property tax revenues back into the road maintenance fund to help support that program. So we've allocated $650,000 in road maintenance for 2023.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
This might be an appropriate time to raise an issue that we talked about at the Public Works Committee prior to this meeting. You might recall last week or the week before, I'd raised the question of how are we spending the $3-point-some million over the next 6 years that is allocated to general facilities projects. Our discussion in our Public Works Committee was that, well, a lot of those expenditures that are listed in the capital facilities plan for $300,000, I think it is next year, and then $600,000 in succeeding years, are actually operational or maintenance expenses that are allowed as REIT expenses, and we're spending REIT on them, so they need to be in the capital facilities plan. Assuming that is all characterized correctly, is it really necessary to do that? I mean, don't we have something else that we can spend REIT on? Are we sending any property tax to REIT eligible expenses in street maintenance or our pavement management program? Could we simplify the use of REIT so we're just spending more of it in lump areas and not spreading it around, and thus simplifying the description of the projects that are in the capital facilities plan.
Yeah, I think I see your point, and
And maybe this requires more exploration than we can do right now, but.
And I do like that idea. Yeah, if you'd indulge me, give me some time, give it some thought, maybe we can even circle back.
And my objective is not to, make more work and changing things around here, but to be simpler, but also to make sure that we don't have hidden facilities projects that we don't know that we're funding, and Public Works says we don't, and that's good, but it still kind of looks like it from how the capital facilities plan is constructed. So if we could simplify it and make all of us assured that those things line up the way we are talking about them, I would feel better.
Okay, so I want to make sure that everybody's questions got answered. If you'd like additional information, it's a little bit different look than what we've done in the past when we've looked at by fund. This is what we're spending, and this fund balance out that we go to the next fund. We're doing it more by category, still setting Public Works off by itself, looking at that in total by category. But this, OpenGov makes it easy to look at it this way. We were kind of forced to put it together this way by department and by category, and I've found that I really enjoy looking at the budget this way. It makes a lot of sense to me. But I think overall, unless there are questions you'd like me to drill down on, that's the high-level look, and I'd be happy to explore further, answer questions.
And we do have the Public Works A-team here to back Steve up if there's some detailed questions. But again, that's one of the nice things about OpenGov. It does allow you those drill down, but we definitely want to work this together to make sure it all makes sense. And this is actually open for public comment, Mr. Hoagland, but you were going to add something.
No, I was just going to, point out the different views. Really encourage everybody to go in, select this report of the 2023 budget, operating and capital, and then click into these views. We have a number of views set up if you wanted to look at the general fund individually, the street maintenance fund, arterial street construction. So the Public Works, aside from fund or Department 713 in the general fund, which is facilities, that's being funded at $300,000 this year. Public Works is Fund 104 and 105 for streets, and then the 400 funds and the 1500 funds. So the utilities, the R&R, and the two street funds.
Miller?
Mr. Young.
Thank you. Mr. Hoagland, just to be clear, I like what we're seeing, and I know that this is a new implementation of a software package that's designed to be as transparent as possible so that the public itself can do some reviews. Back to Mr. Ryan's question, are all of the details in here accessible? Meaning, in some cases, the individual items, or are those still things that are being plugged in as we go along and as we continue to use the software and get other things loaded in? If there's something that council in particular is looking for a greater elaboration on, we should reach out to you, and that's how it will work like that. And eventually for the public, it will be able to do, its own searches as well, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the way we have it set up here, for example, if you wanted to look at the details behind the 41 professional services in Public Works, you need to pull up those 6 or 7 funds that I just listed. Yep. Once this is available to the public, you'll be able to do that through the filtering, and it'll be a a really easy method of going into the filter. You can select if you want to look at expenses. You want it broken down by funds or something else, and then select the funds that you want to look at. So you can see here we have just the Public Works.
No, you've answered my question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Walters.
I'm looking at the same report you are there, same view, I think. And I guess I would like some further explanation as to why the supplies, the small tools and minor equipment, the office and operating supplies, the general supplies, but that supply heading is $400,000 up over what we've been experiencing, or what at least we had budgeted for 2022, and lesser amounts, substantially lesser amounts for actuals in 2020 and 2021. I was pretty sure I was looking at the same view as you are.
Yeah, I think I got off of that when I went into the filters.
Yeah.
Okay. So, sorry, these supply categories in the
Yeah, I'm assuming that those 5 line items roll up into the supplies heading above.
Yes,
and
that's right.
That's where I'm looking at like 2.7 million in 2022 budget and 3.1 million in the 2023 budget, and then pretty significantly smaller actuals in the previous years. I mean that.
Yeah, so I won't drill into fuel. There's only 2 components to fuel: the fleet vehicles, and then the wastewater plant, I think, uses 20 to 30,000 a year in fuel for the incinerator. But office and operating supplies, pretty significant increase from 1.8 to 2 to 2.0.
And you can expand that, right? Is that
Yes.
what you're?
Yeah.
But not on the public portal at this time.
Correct, unfortunately. So I'll use this filter in this on this page. It doesn't have, we can't query as finely as we can in our accounting system. So this will bring up everything that has a -31 in it, which is significantly more than just the -31 lines. And then you can see on in the bars number string here, the ones that start, the first 3 digits are the fund number. So the first one we'll scroll down to is Fund 104. That's the road maintenance fund. Now, actually, so 001-713, this -31, 12,500 both years. That's the facilities budget. This third set of digits, this 311, it has a 3 that indicates it's a revenue. So these are the expenditure codes here. So Fund 104, that's the road maintenance fund. This is one of the supply lines. 75,000 in 2022. They dropped that to 15,000 in 2023. And they're changing, I can see, I could squeeze these together a little more. Might be able to see more of that description.
I think what Mr. Walters is asking for is a way to drill down to add up to those increased expenses in office and operating supplies in the public works.
So yeah, that would be ideal. Unfortunately, there isn't a way to do a query like that that would just grab those. So unfortunately.
Did I answer that? Okay, yes. All right. We'll see we'll try to find another way to present that information then.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
And I suppose one of the complications is because we are looking at a consolidated view, there's not any one person in the back row who can answer the question either, because it's each of their departments is consolidated here into a single line. Blink one for yes.
So in looking at looking at this category from 1.8 to 2 million, the biggest increase there is in the wastewater fund. So
is that?
Yeah, there we go. So
perfect.
And then we can explain what those costs were. I've seen them before, but it's hard to see it through OpenGov, but that's why we have Becky here.
Good evening, Mayor Miller and the council. Yes, for the wastewater plant, as we all know, the wastewater plant is 31 years old and aging. In the 31 account, the office and operating supplies, that's where most of our O&M comes from. For 2023, some additional expenses are replacing the secondary clarifier drives. So the secondary clarifiers are the big round tanks. There's a mechanism that goes around in those tanks, replacing those drives so those clarifiers will continue to work.
And would that be included in these line items? Because that sounds like
It's $110,000. So they're about $55,000 for each clarifier.
And would it be included in small tools and minor equipment or supplies?
It should be in 31, in the 31.
In 31?
Yeah, in 31.
Okay.
Replacing the aeration basin mixers and doing some heat trace for the odor control, along with some other replacing duct heaters, adding some instrumentation to the aeration basins, and a few other less expensive expenses in that account.
And so what's all that add up to, do you think? Those expenses over and above what is the 2022 budgeted amount?
It adds up to $260,000.
Okay, so that's almost 3/4 of the difference in the Public Works budget overall. So we have you to thank.
And I think we're aware the plant is getting aged, and we need to continue. I know we've looked at modifications. Sorry. Oh, Mr. Young.
Yes, just to make sure I'm clear, but your issue, Mr. Walters, is that, that detail is what you're looking to also be able to see, just so you can query it and look at it and review it. That's the whole issue. Of course, all of the things that being put forward is very much needed and maintaining, but the issue that you're bringing forward is simply the idea of being able to see it by clicking on it, correct?
Yeah, that's the idea, but as we know, we're growing this OpenGov thing, and that's why we've got all the experts here to really answer your questions, because those are good questions that we can't see intuitively necessarily with OpenGov. All right, Mr. Hoagland.
Okay, so as long as we're in supplies here, small tools and minor equipment, that was $29,000 2022, $61,500 this year, $35.
And see, I have a feeling you're searching that based on your knowledge of the BARS numbers.
Yeah, that's
okay.
That's exactly right.
All right, I'm just saying that out loud for council, that there's not some intuitive method of finding information. You're using your vast knowledge of the BARS numbers.
Yeah, exactly. So ideally, I could do a query that is /* and then ends in .35, and that would bring up all the utilities, and we'd be able to look at it together. We can do that in Eden. Unfortunately, at this point at least, we don't have that capability in OpenGov. But scrolling through these, the lines, 401 is the water fund. So there's a $6,500 increase in this tools line. This wasn't budgeted at all in 2022. They've already spent almost $4,000, so $1,000 last year and again in 2023. Again, another one that was missed during the budgeting process. It's up to $1,500, from $15,000 to $20,000. So these are all in the water fund, and the water fund has divisions within it for the treatment plant, the intake, transmission, distribution. So several categories all have their own little section of the budget. Then brings us down into 440, which is the wastewater utility, $2,500 each year, up 500. Oh, sorry, that's it for wastewater. This $500 increase is in Fund 501, that's ER&R. From $4,000 to $20,500, that might be the lion's share of the increase for that line.
And then is there a way to get to that detail besides asking somebody in the back to say?
No,
Okay.
we'd be relying on, and I don't have anything in my notes on that.
Mr. Walters.
I just think it's worth saying out loud that I don't really have warm and fuzzy feelings about OpenGov at this point. I am, willing to give it a chance so long as finance staff say we're getting there, and also willing to put in the time, quality time with Steve or Philip to learn it. I just don't want to pretend that I'm liking it that much yet. I don't know how the rest of you feel about it, but
I'm in agreement with you.
Oh, yeah.
It is a work in progress. The information is there. I mean, I'm confident the staff has the information. We know what we're planning on spending. The problem is the presenting and being able to set the information up so you all can ask the right questions. I think that's the challenge I'm hearing.
Well, yeah, and it's a good point. So all the information is there. So I'm trying to transition from hard copy to online at the same time. Frankly, I used to like when we set up the round table up here and passed the microphone around. And there's nothing stopping us from doing that again. All of this data is downloadable into Excel, and we could print out spreadsheets and go through those. I'm not opposed to that. I was trying to get with the program, so to speak. Supplies, this 65,000 difference from 2022 to 2023. That was, I believe that was entirely in the road maintenance fund. It was additional material to do more projects in-house next year. And then the budget, supplies purchased for inventory or resale, these are chemicals that are used at the treatment plants. And same for both years. So, Council, tell me what's on your mind.
Ms. Cleland.
If you're really offering a printed copy, I would appreciate it if it's not a ton of extra work. I guess my challenge is here we only see, 10 lines at a time on a screen, and I love screens, but it would be nice to be able to flip back and forth to feel like I have a little bit more of an understanding. So if that's possible, I don't know how everyone else feels about it. I feel like it would be nice to almost have the traditional paper copy and then also play around on the screen on the platform so that I can see kind of how they relate to one another.
So the format that it's in now, I think we would be at the hard copy level. I don't know how we'd be able to transition between the two, between hard copy and on screen. So,
well, just for me to have a hard copy here and then poke around on the screen and see where those numbers line up, just so I can visualize it in my head, not necessarily in this form, this public forum, but just, you know, as preparation for the next meeting. I don't know how everyone else feels, but I would appreciate a hard copy.
Yeah, I think she's talking about like the bars listing copy that we would get previously.
Yeah, so I think that's what I'm hearing across the board. So we will print spreadsheets that we'll go through next week. We'll do this again, Public Works. That puts us a week behind on the schedule. There's a 5th Monday this month. We could potentially, well, we can play it by ear.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
And I'm not asking for a paper copy. I think a PDF or maybe an Excel copy would be most useful for me. But if you created the paper or if you handed over an Excel, aren't you going to get a representation that matches each fund screen here? Wouldn't we basically see that? So if you were to click on 103 or 104 and then scroll down on the right and expand expenses or expand revenues, isn't that going to match what I would see on a paper copy or the Excel copy? Or are you saying no?
This is what we've been looking at. I guess maybe I'm not understanding this. So this data here at this level of detail, we can spread this, we can export this to a spreadsheet. That's what I was thinking. And that would provide a deeper level of detail than what's available in the reports now.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Young.
Thank you. You know, for me as well, as I agree with Ms. Cleland McGrath, just, you know, I'm visually impaired and I'm kind of a little bit old school as best as I can be, even though I like to consider myself technologically savvy. I still like a piece of paper for right now. That way I can look back and forth. And even in doing the presentations that you are doing, and it allows an overview, which I think is wonderful, and we can actually dive into pieces of it. I think the correlation is what Ms. Cleland McGrath and myself are kind of looking for in anything, you know, anybody else. But I think it would be helpful for me.
Ms. Cleland, did you have anything else?
Yeah, I mean, a paper or PDF is fine too, whatever, just to get a little bit more information in one spot, even if that screen has a lot of small numbers on it, to have a better overarching understanding.
So the approach that I used looking at categories, maybe is that what's throwing this off if we went back to just a fund look? So this is all expenditures in the Fund 104 Road Fund? And we could expand these out. I mean, I guess that's what I want to clarify. I got the sense that this was not a sufficient level of detail.
I think the challenges we also have on OpenGov, we have, 3-4 years of data where previously when we were doing PDF or paper copies, we're just looking at year to year, but I'm not sure. I'm trying to remember what we were looking at before.
Okay.
That could be the challenge.
Miller?
Mr. Young.
No, for me, and I hear the point that you're making, Mr. Hoagland. For me, occasionally there are points within these lines that a deeper dive would be beneficial. And I think that sort of speaks to the question Mr. Walters had about the additional funds and the additional things that some expenses that were added into one line item. It just allows us to be able to reference that, you know, but it doesn't happen with every single line. You know, the overview is perfect. But every once in a while, just some deep dive into some particular ones, being able to see that is important or would be beneficial, to, at least to me.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
I, for one, don't want to shortchange the software either. Like I heard Mr. Hoagland say that there is some value in being able to see the aggregated views into things. I imagine, you know, with the fire department that might make a big difference because there's multiple funds. Maybe with the Parks Department, it makes less or more sense because they've got a bunch of little funds. The ACFL Management Fund doesn't have hardly any money in it. It doesn't really make sense to look at that by itself. It makes more sense to look at it aggregated with the other parks pieces. I don't know if we have a parks view, but I tend to think that we just kind of need to keep muddling through it. We should try everything. You know, let's get the Excel version and look at it, but let's not abandon this software yet. I mean, obviously finance won't, but let's not us as council abandon it for the review of the budget. Let's just look at the Excel or the paper version as well and make sure that we're tracking.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure I understand, again, this is also my first time, but it's not my first time looking at the city budget. It's my first time looking through the OpenGov lens. But I think it all comes back to the detail. You know, how do you get to those details? How do you look at a line and say, here's a $50,000 change? Why is this changed? Because I think that's the fiscal responsibility that you want to be able to provide. So I think I want to make sure that I'm hearing that a good bit, because I think in the old days when we had the Excel spreadsheet, you had a little red triangle in the corner. You could click on that, and if Mr. Hoagland couldn't answer that in the detail, then you could turn back and say, you know, Public Works Director, what does this mean? What is this? So I think that's what yeah, Ms. Hubick.
I would like to make a mix of a suggestion and a recommendation. So when you're in the reports view, test out exporting it to an Excel file and just kind of manipulating it. And then I do want to check in with Mr. Hoagland. I'm looking at the very, very end of some of the Excel file headers, and it doesn't have years on it, but it has period 2, period 3 basis itemizations. I don't know if that's something that you can actually give to us as a definition of the headers that are in the Excel files, or if that's actually in OpenGov somewhere for us to know the details of what we're actually looking at.
So I'm sorry, I guess I'm not following, I apologize.
I forget that you can't see what's on my screen too. So, so under the budget section, so not under reports, but under budget, where the export is up in the upper right-hand side. Yeah, so I just put the all proposals on a spreadsheet, and it emails me, which is also really nice so that you can track it in your email and not lose it. But one of the things that I'm noticing when I'm looking at the Excel file is that some of the headers don't make any sense, and I'm just assuming that period 1 is the most recent year that we're in. So if there's a place that we can go in OpenGov to know what the headers actually indicate as we're looking at it, that also could be really helpful for us as well.
Yeah, great point.
Okay, thank you.
All
right, any other?
So, sorry, Mayor, before we jump off here. So if, because it would be an easy enough to put together spreadsheets by fund, revenues, expenditures. We just put them in a hard copy notebook, PDF, whatever you prefer. But I want to make sure I understand. So this level that we're seeing here, if there's more detail, you want to see it. So for example, a category like this that might have, need to find an example that would work. So we have the ability to add additional detail. When you see these little arrows on the side, that's generally what that indicates. So
yeah, this is where you're getting the details on under the proposal details.
So this is what you would want to see. So it's, well,
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
So, well, what is that there? What is new worksheet 1 and that?
So what this allows is additional details. In the description where you say see details within, and you click this down arrow, it drops down to see these other worksheets that feed up. So ideally you would see here $2,000, that would be training for engineers, $2,000 training for road maintenance workers or something like that, but you would see what makes up each of these elements that feed up into this total.
However, in this instance, those cells are blank.
Yeah, so kind of.
So that wasn't a good example.
That was not a good example. All right. And I think we're all starting to get kind of dizzy from you moving around, Mr. Hoagland. So that does make it kind of hard to follow.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Well, I'm not sure we need to revisit the Public Works budget again on paper. Maybe we do need to program a catch-up meeting after we get through the other department budgets to make sure that we're all on the same page.
That sounds great. And appreciate council's patience with this. And again, I would ask you to dig deep in this one and find those things like the export function. I think that's a good one, but when you export it and it doesn't make sense, that doesn't really help. But particularly, I'm counting on the staff having the details for some of those, what I call deltas in the budget, the changes, the big expenses, and we owe answers for all of those.
Yeah, we will be rescheduling Public Works to next week, and then we'll come back with governmental funds afterwards. Okay. I'll have PDFs for all of you, and we'll go through at a detailed level those printouts by fund.
All right, seem reasonable? Okay, Mr. Walters?
Well, that is kind of the opposite of what I just said, but you were distracted. Maybe we should poll council on that.
Yeah, so what Mr. Walters was proposing that I heard was we continue on our other, as scheduled, Mr. Hoagland, but then we revisit Public Works as required in the future. Okay, that's what and perhaps after the other departments. So we'll just keep pressing on. But again, questions on the Public Works budget, obviously questions on any phase of the budget, I want those to be asked. So we don't need to try to do this again next week.
Okay.
We're gonna go to what we have scheduled, which I believe is the operating budget for other general fund, I think.
Mayor Miller?
Yes, governmental.
Mr. Young.
I just want to say here at this point, how much personally I appreciate the effort that goes into this. I know it's been a Herculean task, not only transitioning software and getting it up and running to as best as we can in each step that we try to modify it such that it meets our needs. The level of detail that you brought here is absolutely fantastic. I think OpenGov, for what we have, will be a useful tool. But I didn't want you to miss how much we recognize the hard work has gone into implementing the data into all of this. We were just simply saying that on some of the lines, it would be good if we could have the additional details that we seek personally for whatever reason to understand, and it would just be benefit. So I didn't want us to miss the hard work that the team and the staff has put into it, and I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Like I said, I'm confident the staff knows all of the changes. We're just not presenting it for you all to be able to ask those good questions. So it's all good. So Mr. Hoagland, anything else before we wrap things up here?
Yeah, I'll give the slides to Greg after this, and I wonder if perhaps if I would have illustrated these categories first. Just a lot of stuff going through my head, I guess, because I tried to head off.
And don't translate that into moving the mouse around, please.
I tried to head off questions to begin with, so all of the significant changes I went through right at the beginning, but there was no context for you, so maybe it would have made sense to just go through this and then say, don't forget about, you know, the 600,000 in overlays and the 7.6% staff increase and all these other things. So anyway,
it's all good. We'll get it.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters.
Okay, so it would have been helpful to have those slides in advance, I think, because then we could have tried to process them. Because it is difficult for some of us to process all those numbers on the screen while you're reviewing them all and we're doing everything else here. Also, one of the slides early on, it had the sales tax breakdown. I did look it up real quick, and I would like you to bring that back next week, because I do think there are some corrections there, and that the city did adopt that 0.1% affordable housing sales tax countywide, or the city adopted ours, and the county adopted it countywide. It applies everywhere. I don't think it was reflected on the chart. We don't pay it. We pay our version that we adopted before they did, but it reduces the separation between our sales tax rate and some of the other cities. We have the same rate as Mount Vernon, it seems to me. So
okay, I got those off DOR's website just today. It may not be reflective of the the most recent changes then.
I don't know.
We'll check that. Okay, anything else for the good of the order? Okay, with that, I will adjourn the October 17th City Council meeting. Thank you.